you? How was your SOCAP? Okay, come on, tell me more than that. How's your SOCAP? One of the things that we love about doing SOCAP, and I think it's been particularly true this year, is the vibrant community that comes out of doing this event in the first place. And with the theme of igniting vibrant communities, to be able to watch this community, even before you arrived, begin to form and grow and meld and start to do work together. So we're really deeply grateful to each one of you for coming and being a part of this wonderful, what looks like a phantom community, but actually isn't. It's a community that continues to work together and grow all year long. Many of you have been talking and interacting and making things happen on Pathable, on our on the web-based program that we're using for community. It will continue year-round, and we will continue to have conversations there, and we want you to stay a part of this community until we gather again next year. We used to bring the whole staff up and thank everybody in person, and it's gotten to where we actually cannot do that. We have so many amazing people who work with us, who do phenomenal things to make this happen. But I really want to give a special shout out to 4 of them in particular, who are the 4 people who work deeply to make the content come together. Liz Krieger, Sarah Stamino-Nichols, Lindsay Norcott, and Tim Sorens. Without the 4 of them and the amazing team of Frontier Market Scouts who worked with them, none of this content would have happened. They are amazing, and I'd love to give them a round of applause. One of the fun things about the Frontier Market Scouts is that it's an organization that helps place interns with other organizations, and it actually got its start here at SOCAP, so it's great fun to have them working with us. Also, a huge thank you to our sponsors. We're going to have the sponsor loop running, and I dare not name any of them individually, but if it were not for the sponsors and those of you who pay for the tickets to come here, this would never happen. It is a labor of love in so many ways for all of us, and we're so grateful to the sponsors and to all of you who are here to make this happen. That's what I have to say right now, and we are going to move on with our program now. We have some great content still yet to come. I see many of you eating your lunches here. Please know that bring your lunch in with you and eat while we're talking. And I'm going to now ask Penelope Douglas if she would come out and introduce our first speaker. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I love the stamina of the group that's with us for the closing. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome on stage Margie Sullivan, who is the Chief of Staff and Chief Operating Officer for USAID. Now, I know for some of you in the room, it's probably obvious why USAID is so important to our work. They're an enormously important partner throughout the world. For many of you, though, it's probably not so obvious, and so I'm really happy to have her with us, and I know that she's got a great video she'll show us. I also wanted to tell you that backstage I was asking Margie what are some other things that I could quickly say about her, and she said, well, like you, I'm a Californian. I grew up here in the Bay Area, and she also said, tell them I love politics, and I love investing. And I said, well, that's just what they're going to want to hear. So anyway, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Margie on stage. Thank you.
Our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all cherish our children's futures, and we are all mortal.
Today, we seek to move beyond the accomplishments of the past, to establish the principle that all the people are entitled to a decent way of life.
Let us not forget that each child saved, each refugee housed, each disease prevented, each barrier to justice brought down, each sword turned into a plowshare brings us closer to peace, closer to freedom, closer to dignity.
America is a nation with a mission. And that mission comes from our most basic beliefs. Our aim is a democratic peace. A peace founded upon the dignity and rights of every man and woman.
We also know that progress in the most impoverished parts of our world enriches us all. So the United States will join with our allies to eradicate such extreme poverty in the next 2 decades by connecting more people to the global economy, by empowering women, by giving our young and brightest minds new opportunities to serve, and helping communities to feed, empower, and educate themselves. By saving the world's children from preventable deaths. That's how we'll confront the challenges of our time. This is how we will seize the promise of this moment in history. Who are we to believe that today's challenges cannot be overcome? When we've seen what changes the human spirit can bring. That is why we look to the future not with fear, but with hope.
Hello, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that video. You know, there was a Navy SEAL that we worked a lot with at USAID over in Africa. And when he was ready to retire from active duty, we asked him and a team to visit some of our missions around the world and to film our work in the field. And then after that, we asked the 3 living presidents, or the 3 most recent presidents, if we could use their words to describe the work that we do throughout the world. And what I hope you take from that video is that development work is one of the greatest manifestations of American values, that the work is bipartisan, and that it touches every basic element of the human experience. You know, I'm really pleased to join you today in wrapping up this conference, this very successful conference. Kevin Jones and his team deserve an enormous amount of credit for what they pulled off. You know, few conferences attract such a broad array of participants from so many different walks of life. You know, whether investors, whether entrepreneurs, whether representatives of nonprofits or religious organizations, it's unique and it's impressive that such a cross-section has come together this week. So thank you to Kevin and his team for making it all possible. You know, when you look at the world today, today being September 5th, 2014, 2 things are quite powerfully evident. The first is that never in modern history have we had more simultaneous, pressing, urgent humanitarian crises happening at one time. Whether it's Iraq or Syria, or South Sudan, or West Africa, or Ukraine, it feels like parts of the world are genuinely unraveling. On the other hand, never in history have we been so close to ending extreme poverty. Never. So what does that mean? Well, what that practically means that just last week, for example, the U.S. government airlifted more than 60 metric tons of relief supplies to Erbil, Iraq, including 3,000 kitchen sets, 6,000 water containers, 12,000 blankets, and 380 rolls of heavy-duty plastic sheeting to help the most vulnerable families in northern Iraq prepare for the winter. We also sent 1,000 beds to Liberia with 130,000 sets of protective gear and 50,000 hygiene kits. And on, you get the idea. But despite the dire headlines that you hear on the news, we're also living in a time of tremendous hope and possibility. If you consider in the last 20 years, the number of children throughout the world in school, the number of kids going to school reached 90%. Roughly 2 billion people gained access to clean water. 45 new democracies came into existence. Child mortality rates fell by over 40%, and poverty declined by 52%. So when President Obama, in his last State of the Union address, called on Americans to lead the effort to end extreme poverty over the next 20 years, it wasn't a pie-in-the-sky aspirational dream. It was a clarion call to do something very real and very achievable. Ending extreme poverty and doing that by 2030 is what we have set as our overarching goal at USAID. What that practically amounts to is a quest to elevate 1 billion people out of poverty. You know, 50 years ago, when President Kennedy created USAID, the vast majority of capital that flowed into the developing world from the U.S. came from foreign aid dollars. Today, over 90% of capital to the developing world comes from the private sector. Private sector investment, remittances from the diaspora, and philanthropic organizations. If you want to impact what's going on in the developing world, you have to be able to harness private capital flows. And to reach people in Kinshasa or Tacloban or Port-au-Prince or Kabul, you have to be able to utilize technology. As I suspect most of you in this room know, there are more SIM cards in the world today than toothbrushes. And that's saying something. There are also more players in the development arena than we've ever seen before. Big corporations, investors, entrepreneurs are every bit as critical to success as governments, religious organizations, and traditional nonprofit groups. And that brings me to all of you and what we are doing to try to foster your success. To marshal the evolving landscape, to harness private capital, to embrace new actors, and to exploit technology, USAID had to change. We had to restructure the agency and really refocus our programs. In this spirit, we launched the U.S. Global Development Lab, which is USAID's version of DARPA, a new entity within the agency focused on harnessing science, technology, innovation, and partnerships. How many people in this room have worked with or know people at USAID? Oh, good, a lot of you. Well, then what you'll really appreciate is that the lab has become our center for partnering with you in an effort to bring science and technology to solving development challenges. In addition to creating the Global Development Lab, we also created something we call the Private Capital Group, which you may or may not know about. But essentially, it's a SWAT team of investment professionals that are solely focused on supporting investments throughout the developing world. And together, the Global Development Lab and the Private Capital Group have really transformed how we program our funds and how we operate at USAID. So let me touch on 4 specific categories or ways that we are trying to do a better job of connecting and partnering with you. The first is building out the field of impact investing. You know, as a serious field, impact investing is still in its infancy. I know earlier this week you all heard from Judith Rodin from Rockefeller. And, you know, with Rockefeller, we are investing in things like the Global Impact Investing Network, or GEARS, to not just lay a foundation, but to create standards for impact investing. Also, back in March, I went to Rome, to the Vatican, because the Catholic Church had its first ever impact investing conference. And essentially what happened is Pope Francis convened his, all of his orders of nuns and priests and implored them to not just invest their endowments to make money, but to invest their endowments to also create social change and alleviate poverty. And so what the Vatican was doing was convening a group to try to figure out how to do that. And as this process grows, hopefully the next time they have an impact investing conference, many of you in this room will actually be there too. The second thing we're doing is we're working harder to support entrepreneurs. I mentioned before we created the lab. And what that really means is we're really trying to hone how we source new technologies and how we do a better job of scaling technologies. I think a number of you are familiar with our Development Innovation Ventures, or DIV program. Well, to date, we've invested in over 100 social entrepreneurs that have robust evidence of impact, cost effectiveness, and clear pathways to scaling their products. This morning, USAID's team met with Eric Donison of Off-Grid Electric. Off-Grid Electric is an enterprise that provides affordable, reliable energy services to communities essentially living in the dark. DIV's early stage investment, along with investors like the Malago Foundation, allowed Off-Grid to close a $7 million round led by Vulcan Capital, Solar City, and the Omidyar Network. That's a big deal. That investment allowed Off-Grid Electric to expand its services, giving its customers 50 times more light at far more affordable costs. The third thing we're doing is we're trying to build out an ecosystem of entrepreneurs throughout the world. You know, we did a lot of work in the Middle East in conjunction with Secretary Kerry's peace talks to try to spawn entrepreneur activity in the West Bank and surrounding areas. And, you know, today we also want to announce additional funding for our PACE program, our Partnering to Accelerate Entrepreneurship programming. Through PACE, we are partnering with incubators, accelerators, and investors to catalyze investment in early stage enterprises throughout the world. The first three partnerships are with Village Capital, Shell Foundation, and Unitas Seed Fund. Together, that will represent $40 million in capital off of our core investment of $6 million. But we're not only just making those investments, we're working hard to follow up and to figure out what works and what doesn't work. So moving forward, we do an even better job of incubating and accelerating innovations. Finally, we were building out the ecosystem for makers through our support of Gearbox, an open space for innovation in Nairobi that brings together inventors from diverse backgrounds to prototype and manufacture solutions for local change. The fourth area we're trying to do a better job of partnering is building out challenging marketplaces. From recent research that I know many of you are familiar with by the Omidyar Network and Monitor Deloitte, we've seen highlighted the importance of not only investing in individual firms, but also creating long-term strategic investments to scale entire sectors. Scaling entire sectors is an enormous challenge and one the governments are particularly poised to take on. You know, I know that earlier you've heard about President Obama's Power Africa initiative, but that's probably the most concrete recent example of an effort to really scale a market. And how Power Africa came about was a couple years back. The president really wanted to intensify his focus on the region. And he sent a team of people to Africa. And basically, the group came back and concluded that the biggest obstacle to growth on the continent was the absence of reliable, predictable access to power. What came out of that was a lot of effort to brainstorm about how to solve the challenge of access to power in Africa. And what was really clear was the government programs alone couldn't possibly do it, couldn't make a dent in the problem. And so what we did is we made a list of every single energy project in target countries that was currently under development. And then we convened folks and we talked about what would have to happen to accelerate progress. And that meant everything from figuring out reforms that had to occur within African governments. It meant deploying people to actually work inside those governments. And then it meant figuring out how to further de-risk the investments, either through risk insurance, technical assistance, or access to low-income or inexpensive financing. And the upshot of that is that when we just a couple weeks back had 50 African leaders come to Washington, we were able to announce that we were about a third of the way towards doubling energy access in sub-Saharan Africa. So taking on those kinds of massive challenges is no longer attainable or remotely doable by governments alone. It really is all about working together with the private sector throughout the world to catalyze change. You know, on a more micro level, in the context of Power Africa, we worked to fund and expand Beyond the Grid. And Beyond the Grid was, you know, a specific clean energy effort with 27 founding partners, including investors like Grey Ghost Ventures, Khosla Impact, Capricorn Investment, who committed $1 billion collectively over 5 years to producing energy for African homes, businesses, and schools. And those are the kinds of investments in hard-to-reach parts of the African continent that are truly transformative. So anyway, in conclusion, I just want to say to all of you that years ago when I graduated from college, the coolest job you could get was to work on Wall Street. Everybody wanted to go to Wall Street. Today, when I visit college campuses, the hottest thing going is the development space and people that want to both make money and want to make the world a better place. And so I really just want to leave you with the sense that we are so committed to supporting your efforts in this area. And we're working hard every day to be more nimble partners to all of you. And I think one sign of success, one hallmark that we've made a dent in the challenge is if in the future we're able to have conferences like this, not just in San Francisco, but in Dar es Salaam or Abuja or Phnom Penh. So anyway, thank you all and best of luck. Thank you.
Thanks, Margie. Can you all hear me? Yeah. Well, I got to say, that doesn't sound like the agency of yesterday. That sounds like an agency of tomorrow. They're doing a lot of exciting stuff at USAID, and it's the kind of, I think, incorporation of innovation and real true deep collaboration with actors and practitioners out in the field. You heard the list. I mean, those are stellar co-actors. I'm Tim Freundlich. I don't think I got an intro, but I'm happy to play the interlude. They're actually going to be setting up furniture, so just a couple minutes. I know, like many of you, my team at Impact Assets and I, along with my work with the board, with Hub and SOCAP, really use this this flashpoint once a year to kind of recharge, reconnect. Of course, conferences are good for that. But more than that, too, to really look at what's ahead for us and our teams. And we bring ourselves together and kind of get gassed up, but also look into what's ahead. And the panel that'll be coming out is exactly going to do that for us. But before that, I also wanted to, in the spirit of announcements and things that have been going on throughout the conference, we always like to do something every year. Last year, Impact Assets was really thrilled to stand up here and talk about a seed ventures funding platform that we were wiring into our donor advised fund, which we were launching forwards on that day, and then proceeded to run a whole beta test. And I'm pleased to say that we generated about $500,000 in very, very small seed commitments to social ventures in convertible notes off of a donor advised fund, which is kind of a first. I mean, it is a first in that whole sector of trying to do that, and we'll continue to move that forwards and report back. But also, slide, if you can bring up a slide, we're going to launch into a whole registration period right now. In fact, we're about halfway through it, going state by state by state, and bring 2 new investment products to market, hopefully by the end of the year, one on global sustainable agriculture and one on microfinance inside of microfinance, franchise savings and the like. And the next slide, you can just see the actual names of them. But basically, we've got to figure out how to bring more and more mainstream wealth management apparati and their clients across the country into orbit with all this stuff that we've been talking about. And to do that, it's so unsexy plumbing, but you've got to get down into the banking and the wirehouse structures that permeate our capital market system, and actually get these things to show up in brokerage accounts. So we've been working on this for like a year plus, and we're really excited that we should be coming out with 2 new products that by this time next year will be hopefully available at a financial advisor near you, and so you should look for them, and hopefully we'll be able to celebrate having brought the first tens of millions of dollars through both of those products in sustainable ag and microfinance. But with that, let me invite this whole panel up. I think Penelope is going to moderate it, if I'm correct, and we have a slew. They'll do introductions, but thanks for listening and giving me time to set up the chairs.
We'll be facilitating it all the way to the left on 5. A little bit this way. Hi again, everybody. For those of you who've been at SOCAP in the past, this closing session is always about where we're going, whereas the opening plenary, as you might recall if you were with us, was more about where we've come from. And so I'm going to do the best job I can of moderating a really wonderful group of individuals, each of whom are going to help us contribute to that conversation. The other thing that I want to forewarn you about is that we don't really decide about this group until about 3 hours before we're on stage, because we really want ourselves, Kevin and I and Rosalie and others, to think about how we're going to frame this conversation, and then we try to invite some people to join us. So I also know that at least a couple of the people on stage with me are not shy. And so, as usual, I'm going to be doing my best to moderate, but also have a conversation. So without any further ado, let me try to make some introductions here. To my immediate left is Vineet Rai. You may have met him last year as well. He's the founder and chairman of IntelliCap and Avishkar. To his left is Catherine Hoke, who's the founder of Defy Ventures. Some of you might have heard her speak earlier in the week. To her left is Lisa Sharon Harper, who's the senior director of mobilizing for Sojourner. And I don't need to introduce that guy over there.
That's right.
But I'm going to let each of these individuals give a little bit more color to the introduction I just gave. And what I've asked them each to do is tell you not so much about their organizations, but what drove them to do the work they do. So I'm actually going to mix this up a little bit. Catherine, I'm going to start with you. what has driven you to do the work that you do with Defy?
Yeah, so the work that we do at Defy is to transform the hustle of formerly incarcerated drug dealers and gang leaders. And the way that I got into this, I used to work in venture capital and private equity, and after a prison visit at the age of 26, I was exposed for nearly the first time to real injustice. And so what fires me up to do this work is a hatred of injustice. I see, it's called the criminal justice system that I work in. It's so incredibly unjust. I also have a real passion for fatherhood, and in the communities that we serve, which I think are some of the most impoverished communities, there's a real lack of positive male role models, and so I have a passion for fatherhood. And so we equip men and women, but predominantly men, to be all that they can be, to make sure that they're changing the legacies. That's some of what inspires me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm actually going to let Kevin go next, because I sort of see a thread here about fatherhood and grandfatherhood.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. I got into this. I cashed out of the .com in a good time when it was my 7th business. This is the 8th. And I was starting another one, and I was kind of becoming obsessed. And my daughter said, Dad, you had business career in Mississippi and then moved here and it worked to be international. And she said, Dad, you don't need the money and you've proved your point. What's your life about? And I just hadn't asked that question since, a long time before. And then did some things very badly. I'm a really bad member of a nonprofit board that works slowly for consensus. And then I said, well, I'm going to go, solve a direct problem. And it turned out I worked a couple of years on malaria in sub-Saharan Africa, and it turned out I'm almost the exact wrong person to solve that problem. So I failed at that. And then at that time, figuring out what to do, and my grandson was born. And I said, well, damn, he's going to inherit a bad world. I need to do something. So started doing this stuff.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Wow. Lisa, how about you? Could you tell us briefly about your work, but most importantly, what's driven you to your work?
Absolutely. Well, I work with Sojourners. Sojourners is about 43 years old. We started in Chicago with Jim Wallace and company. And it started in the midst of the Vietnam War era, the tail end of the Civil Rights Movement, the beginning of the Women's Liberation Movement. And what they were looking around at the world and saying, why is the church not speaking to these issues? And we're still doing that. Our mission is to articulate the call to biblical justice for the world and for the church, and really to shape the conversation both in the church and also in Capitol Hill and in the White House. So the work that I do is actually to mobilize the church to engage these issues of social justice, multiple issues of social justice. And what motivates me to do that, somebody else actually asked me that once, and it was like bing, like a light bulb went off, and I got it, I knew it. It is the reality that the church, generally speaking, across the board, there are always exceptions, and there actually are great pockets of wonderful activity. But the church is struggling, and especially my arm of the church, which is the evangelical arm of the church, is struggling to be worthy of the moniker Bride of Christ, which is what it claims from Scripture. So I live and I do what I do in order to help the church to become worthy of that moniker.
Thank you so much. And Vineet.
I thought, why are you keeping me at the last? Probably you noticed that I dread this question, and I dread this question simply because I never could figure out why I do what I do. So I can give you a quick history. I founded Intellicap Avishkar in 2001 and 2002, so it's been quite some time. Before that, I used to live in a forest. So one thing that always strikes me is probably I got bored of the forest and wanted to do something else. So getting bored was one reason. The second part was I had no money, so I wanted to actually find out how rich people look. So I started a venture capital fund. Discovered over the last 14 years it's a pretty tough and challenging activity. To find them is easy probably, getting the money out of them is very difficult. And the third part that probably inspired me is I always was looking for something new, and Intellicap probably satisfies that part of it. So not as inspirational as my co-panelists, but this is the best I can come up with.
Wonderful answer. So for all of you who can't see what's happening in front of us, our countdown clock just changed. about 5 minutes ago, and we have 5 minutes less time than we thought we did, unless I can like secretly angle for extra time. So we're going to have to move really quickly to the questions that we talked about briefly backstage. So the way I want to frame this is I want to start with community, I want to go to community of practice, and then I want to talk about systems. And Lisa, I think you're the perfect person to tell us a little bit about what you think what you think is absolutely essential that this audience knows about what has to change in terms of what's happening in place. And what I need to say about Lisa is she's most recently been in Ferguson, Missouri, doing a lot of work. So I know you're going to have about 2 minutes to tell us this.
That's okay.
Go for it.
So this fan is a fan that was given to me by an usher at the funeral of Michael Brown. And I was sitting in the second overflow room of a packed church full of people who had streamed to this church from across the city of St. Louis because they had a trauma that had happened in their city. Not only the death of a young man, but also the realization and the clarity from that death and the response of the police officers of a great, great disparity of the power structures in the city of Ferguson and throughout and in local neighborhoods throughout the city of St. Louis. So what I would say to the people of SOCAP is that when you think about Ferguson, when you watch the news, when you think about other cities who are suffering from the same kinds of inequity of leadership and power, one of the things that made that happen or made it possible to happen is because the people of Ferguson were not able to actually exercise ownership over the leadership of their lives. They were disenfranchised in a major way in almost every decision-making corner of that city. Now, social impact investing. I would say, yes, Ferguson needs you. But what does it look like for you to go to the city, talk to the leaders, and ask them, what is it that we can do to help you? They need help with schools. They need help with parks. There are parks that used to have thriving green space that have been since shut down because they just don't care about that area in Ferguson. So social impact can make a huge difference, but ownership by the people of Ferguson and surrounding areas is going to be essential.
So when you think about this group of entrepreneurs and investors, and you think about the critical importance of what happens in a place, which is so important to our work, you can't do it without being focused on place and place-based innovation and the story of a place. What gives you hope about what's happening in the impact investing arena?
So what gives me hope is I've had so many conversations here with people. Just a couple of days ago, I was sitting in the hub and literally sitting in one place, and 5 separate people came up at one point, and we started talking, and I learned about what they're doing. And the thing that's so special about impact investing is that it's so specific. I mean, the things that people are doing are so niche, so specific, but they really are meeting a real need. Okay. So when you think about the purpose of an economy in the first place, right? The purpose of an economy is for the flourishing of the people, for the common good. That's the power of impact investing. It actually gives us the ability to put money specifically towards things that help to meet a need in a community. So that's why I say, hey, we need you in Ferguson. We need you in Harlem. We need you in the northwest quadrant of DC. We need you here in Oakland and other places. But when we talk about the need and we talk about flourishing, it's essential, even scripturally, and I'm a Christian, that we look and we make sure we understand that the leadership has to actually come from the community.
Thank you.
Otherwise, it won't be owned by them.
Thank you so much. This is a great segue. Thank you for that. I'm going to turn to Catherine. You're in the context of telling us a little more about DeFi. What I'd like you to sort of help us do is sort of see where we're going when we try to tie what happens in place-based work to communities of practice. How do you start to develop a community of practice, and how do you draw on a community of entrepreneurs, a community of stakeholders, to do the best work you can and move it forward. And tell us how that matters to us, really, as we think about the next year's work.
Sure. So we started our work in New York City, and we just recently scaled it to the Bay Area. And as we engage a community, it's not just people in those two cities there. It's when getting to be here at SOCAP and getting this exposure, even after this, people are like, okay, great, I want to be involved. And so we have provided relevant opportunities for people to get involved. Like we're not like, will you come and serve in the soup kitchen? If you are a business person, with the work that we do, we say, come roll up your sleeves and teach one of our guys how to work a financial model. And then they can provide mentoring and pro bono services in their area of expertise. So we've been drawing on communities. We have 2,000 volunteers in just over 2 years who have been able to participate and draw on their networks as well.
So tell us a little more about both the networks of those that are the stakeholders in your work, and also the networks of those you need to draw into your work. Just give us a little more color on that. So what are the 3 or 4 different communities that you really need to continue to grow?
Sure. So most of our volunteers are business professionals, or predominantly CEOs and investors, venture capitalists. We host these Shark Tank style competitions, and they come in to offer business feedback and mentoring. We have drawn heavily from the faith-based community, and we would love to get more engaged in faith-based communities as well. We need to get more penetrated into ethnic minorities as well, into these communities, because we serve people, most of the people that we serve are ethnic minorities, and so we would love to engage people who come from similar backgrounds, and we need people, most of the people that we serve are African American, so if we can get African American men to also serve as mentors and as the investors, that's where we really start to win.
Okay, so Kevin, you're listening to these 2 fabulous women talk about the importance of place-based innovation, and then beginning to draw on the idea of a community of practice. But what you and I have been talking a lot about this week is sort of what needs to happen at the systemic level, and where do we need to provide ourselves more rigor, more honesty, more whatever, and where do you actually see the best opportunities for systems change to occur that will help people who are working in communities of practice in place, not just in the U.S., of course, but around the world? So where are you focused at a slightly higher altitude,
Yeah, I think cultural literacy is a really big thing because, the folks who are trying to help usually don't come from the places where the people need help come from. And so I see that as a real interesting, critical need. There is so figuring out what the cultural context of who you're trying to help is. There was a particular accelerator program working in sub-Saharan Africa, and it was trying to get this technology. It's a roller barrel kind of thing, and it's like, it'll save all these women all this time going to get water. Well, actually, when they found out going to get water was the only time they got to be together, the only time they got to be unsupervised, the only time they had community. And so the technology was a really good idea, but they hadn't talked to the people about what they were losing when they did that. And so I think some of the smartest investors, I think there's huge opportunities around financial inclusion, but you have to figure out how to talk to those folks, and many of those folks don't make decisions individually. There's a matriarch or a gatekeeper, and it's different in each community. In San Francisco, Ben Mangum was one of my mentors in this place, and he figured out who the gatekeepers were in the Hmong that are in Little Saigon, which is completely different than the Filipinos at 6th and Mission. And so finding out who the gatekeepers are, and that you're not selling individuals, often you're selling communities who have people who say it's okay to deal with you. So all those kinds of things. And then around this particular opportunity of financial inclusion and Obamacare meets and health, because of that, the technologists need to learn to listen respectfully to poor folks in their cultural context, which is, oddly enough, not what they teach you at MBA schools anywhere. Because the path to wealth in these 2 niches is based on listening respectfully to poor folks. And that's not a skill that, affluent MBAs who went to exclusive camps have ever really picked up.
You were, it's interesting. I don't know if anybody in the room was with us in the fantastic discussion we had just before I ran over here, which was around mentoring. And what is the promise of mentoring, and can technology be an important tool in scaling kind of mentoring systems? But the most important, one of the most fascinating and important parts of the conversation, which I really appreciated so much participation in, was on exactly the same topic, which is we can make systemic change, and technology is going to help us do that, but cultural literacy is critical. And so a lot of the people in that room were drawing out, culturally, there's so much difference between how across the globe we ask for or don't feel comfortable asking for the kind of mentoring or human capital that we need. And so where I was going in my mind while I was listening to you is, there's a lot of systemic work we can do, but we've got to continue to pay attention to how we translate that to culture. How does it remain so place-based at the same time that we do this kind of movement towards systemic change? Vineet, you and I were talking behind stage, and you were saying, there's some things that I really, really want us to expose. And one of the words that you used quite a bit was honesty. And you were talking a little bit about the need to sort of get really out in front of some important things that I think maybe we presume are needle-shifting things that have already taken place, or networks that have already kind of proven themselves. Can you talk a little bit about what you were saying to me about what needs to change and about the honesty factor?
So what I was saying is impact investing, depending on how you see its origin, is 14 years to 8 years old right now. 8 years because roughly around 2007 or 8, the term got coined, and some of us started around 2001, 2002, so 14 years. So it's early teens to very early age. So depending on the maturity level, I actually believe that we did a lot to create hype, and SOCAP, Sankalp, and a lot of us have been a co-contributor to that hype. I think we are reaching a stage where inside these gatherings, we need to start getting a little bit honest about ourselves, whether that hype that we have created, which as a child we needed to actually reach the teenage that we are in now, should we be held more accountable for that? So I think the question that we have is, do we have a parent, and is the parent going to regulate us, or are we going to regulate ourselves? And this honesty issue actually comes from the definition itself. So one of the big questions that we have been grappling with, and I think there is an acceptable definition that is being presented now, whether you look at GIN or you look at the new report that's going to come out of the G7, we are talking about an intent and output and outcome as two different parts. The problem is there is no way in the world I know what my intent is. At least I may know, you might not know. So the question is, therefore, all accountability right now is moving to the output, leaving the intent aside. Simply because people assume if you are claiming to be an impact investor, your intent is good. And I think that's where the challenge starts. So how do you, if we define ourselves in a very obfuscated manner, there is no way we will be ever held accountable. Yeah. That actually boils down to us claiming that we have $10 billion of impact investing. And I can tell you with 14 years of fundraising exercise that $10 billion is really very elusive. So I don't know where it is hiding, but it surely is somewhere there because it has been documented. I agree. And I can tell you I'm a very good fundraiser, and I'm a very good chaser, but it's very, very difficult to find that 10 billion. So it's good to say we are 10 billion when we were actually children, but now since we are in teenage, we might have to start asking ourselves, it is 10 billion or 5 or 1 or maybe much lesser. And the second part is, what is that money doing? Yeah. Is that money really participating in somebody else's creation much later and then consoling ourselves that we are making a difference, which I think majority of us are doing. And a few of us who are actually really trying to take the martyr syndrome far too far and trying to commit suicide, doing things which they should not be doing, or somebody else should be doing. So I think we have two extremes, probably a very small percentage doing the very high risk, very difficult work, and 80% of us just participating in the bandwagon called impact investing, because some of us sitting here have created the hype. And I think these are the gatherings which have to actually get away from pleasing and congratulating each other on what we have achieved and start asking some hard questions about, are we really doing the right things? And what are the outcomes, the long-term outcomes of these short-term outputs, which largely has been focused on counting the number of lives we touched And remember that whether we are selling a LED lamp or giving a microfinance loan, it's not going to, it may touch the life of the individual, it's not going to transform the life. And ultimately, the objective with which we have gone out to the world is we are trying to transform. And I think that's really the challenge. So the honesty has to come on this ocean. We must celebrate that we have actually come some distance, but we must keep asking ourselves, is that the distance that, is the hype really justified for the distance we have covered?
So I'm going to challenge all of us to take Vineet's question. And I'd like each of us in the 5 minutes or so we have remaining to, and you can just signal to me where you want to go in order because this is going to take a little thought. But what can each of us do ourselves, and what would we like the audience to do to create more honesty is my question. So, so in other words, let's respond to Vineet's question with the time that we have left. It's not exactly where I thought we were going, but this is where I think we should go.
Okay.
So when you're ready, just let me know, and I'll let you speak to that. Yes.
So I went to Ferguson with Sojourners not to go and try to save Ferguson. In fact, I have a very, very strong, obviously, value for Indigenous leadership, the leadership on the ground. So I didn't go for a long time. Kept talking with people, asking, where is the need? And it turned out the need was actually to help the white community to engage, particularly white evangelicals and multi-ethnic evangelical churches. So that's why I went. And I ended up speaking in 3 different major forums to evangelical pastors and faith leaders in Ferguson. And the first one is what strikes me, and this is where we get to honesty. We had a time at a bar and grill, where I ended up preaching. And afterwards, we talked about the need for leadership to come from the community, and I asked the pastors to reflect amongst themselves in twos. How does their gut feel? Like, let's be real. How do they feel when they imagine themselves going to Ferguson and not doing anything, but actually just sitting at the feet of the people in Ferguson and listening and being led by them? What does it look like for them to be led by them? And 2 white pastors stood up and said, one of them, the first one said, as a white man, I have been taught my whole life that I'm supposed to lead everyone else. That blew my mind. I was like, whoa, we just got deep up in here. And then the second one confessed that it had never even occurred to him that the people of Ferguson would actually have to lead him. And the thing is, these are Christians, and biblically, there's the scripture, Isaiah 61, that says that the salvation of the cities will actually come from the ones who are weeping. It'll come from the ones who are imprisoned right now. It'll come from the ones who are oppressed. So they were really challenged by that, and it was one of those transformative moments.
And sounds very honest.
Yeah.
Who wants to go next? What are you going to think about now that you think can help this audience, us, the movement, be more honest? Kevin, Catherine, Vineet?
My answer is totally different. I mean, this is my first exposure to SOCAP, and being here with everyone talking about creating change and getting honest, I appreciate it when people are like, nope, we can't help you, and we don't have anything to offer. And I like that fast answer because it can help me to stay focused. And then when people do have something to offer, when they just tell me straight up. So that honesty and getting to the point very quickly, instead of saying, yeah, I'm interested, and then never following up.
I think that's a really great point to make, because I think at the level of the personal interaction, I still believe we maintain a great deal of honesty. And I think it's when we're starting to think, my own view is, when we start to think about the larger picture, it's when we see some of the need to be more honest. Kevin?
Yeah, I think when I started SOCAP, I wanted to prove there was a market here, somewhere between giving and investing. And I think, okay, that's kind of proved. It's a phantom $10 billion market or whatever somebody's come up with. But I think now that we're really on base, it's like it's a movement and you use the market. The market's a tool, and the market's not the point. And that's what I've come to start thinking about.
Yeah. I'm thinking very much about some of those things too. Vineet?
So I think I was actually coming from Palo Alto, and there was a debate going on in my car with somebody who's actually running an angel network, trying to convince me to make an investment, which is a very impactful investment. And I was giving her 300 reasons of why I can't make that investment. Because the profit is too thin, the model is too complicated. And the more I tried to explain, the more convinced I got that all my explanations are wrong. So, and by the way, I know about that company for 3 years, and I've been watching it, doing nothing about it. The guy has been struggling. It's a guy, engineer from Oracle, who's trying to do a mobile clinic in West Bengal. And the lady who was trying to convince me, Aditi, is somewhere around. She tried for 1 hour, and she's been trying for 3 years with no. So somewhere I started with a very different belief. That belief has moved on because my investors asked me to return the money at 20% return. And I know while this guy needs money more than anybody else that I'm going to give, but the constraints of what I want to do with him is not allowing me. So what I try to do is connect it with why am I here? So I'm here because SOCAP is celebrating something and you want to be celebrated. It's the same thing we do at Sankalp. And both of us are private institutions. I mean, Sankalp is owned by Intellicap and SOCAP is also a private institution. And while we talk about sharing, we basically are very protective about our turf. So I told Kevin that time has come for us to actually start telling people, showing to people that we can collaborate and not just be protective about our turfs. So we have taken a couple of decisions, which I think, Kevin, if you can go ahead and share, that will be great.
Okay, great. So we are going to merge our marketing databases. We'll reach out for SandCalc through our connections, and he'll do the same thing. I'm going to be on the advisory board with some of our folks on SandCalc, and they're the two largest impact investing conferences other than here. And he'll be on and his people, Aparajita, also will be on our advisory board. So we'll be listening to each other, agreeing on, I'll be providing my input as a, white straight guy from the West or the North, whichever, we think West, he calls us North-South. So we'll create this structural learning thing. We agreed to do it last year, and then we had to realize you have to put things in place. So we'll do those two things. We're also saying that impact is risk. It's not reclassifying some CDFI loans and CRA stuff. It's the risk stuff. It's the new stuff. And we'll probably come up with a much smaller figure, and we just have to deal with, sometimes size doesn't matter. And we'll do those three things anyway to say the real stuff is the risky stuff. We're going to figure out how to merge the databases. I'll sell his event. He'll sell our event. They'll sell our event. We'll do the same thing. And we'll... and then I'll learn how they think, and they will, probably learn how we think.
What a wonderful example of getting more honest. And I had just learned about this myself from Kevin, that Vineet and Kevin had reached this agreement to really share all of this information and really become honest about really being a partnership and not just talking about it. I guess it's time for us to close, but the theme that I sort of heard across all of this was something, again, that Vineet said, I think, first backstage, but I guess I'll take the privilege of repeating it, which is that when you think about impact, and you think about what each of us personally can do, it's taking the risk, I think is what you said, that really proves that you have impact. And all this intent stuff, that's not impact. And so thanks for letting me borrow your thought. But I think that's a really important way to encourage us all, both at the sort of systems level, taking on the political systems, the policy work that needs to be done, the networking and technology that we need to improve, et cetera. But I think we all need to remind ourselves that if we're going to have impact, we need to be honest about the risk we're prepared to take, and we need to take the risk. So thank you all very much. And thanks for being with me on stage and for collaborating so quickly to do this.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have one last thing, and I'm going to, do the thing that everybody does. I've been seeing everybody doing at SOCAP. I'm taking a picture of y'all. So if you'd smile for me, okay? Is everybody ready to smile? 1, 2, 3. Wave to me. Thank you. Thank you. A couple of quick announcements. As you leave, if you've not picked up a pint glass yet, they'll be giving them out at the back door. And we will be soon telling you about SOCAP14 and where and when and all of that, so look out for that information. If I could ask everyone, even those back in the back, to be quiet for just a moment. We're going to end as we began with a story from Ed Edmo. If our volunteers could move to the back and ask everyone to please be quiet and to focus with us up here on the stage as we have Ed give us one last story to close out SOCAP. Thank you. Ed, come tell us a story.
When the legends die, the dreams end. When the dreams end, there is no more greatness. When the legends die, the dreams end. And when the dreams end, there is no more greatness. When the legends die, the dreams end. When the dreams end, there is no more greatness. When the legends die, the dreams end. When the dreams end, there is no more greatness. I'd like to begin to tell you that I'm sharing these legends with a granddaughter. She's learning the legends from me. This is a legend. It's really a fun legend. So everyone get your hands up. You can help me say this. Porcupine would sharpen his quills and stick them in his tail. Everyone help me say it. Porcupine would sharpen his quills and stick them in his tail. Help me say it. Porcupine he'd sharpen his quills, stick them in his tail. A little bit louder. Porcupine he'd sharpen his quills, stick him in his tail. Friends came by and said, Porcupine, what are you going to do today? Oh, I'm going to go get me a buffalo. No, you're too slow. You're too fat to get a buffalo. I know I'm slow and fat. I'm going to get me a buffalo. Porcupine, he'd sharpen his quills and stick him in his tail. He'd sharpen his quills, stick him in his tail. Sharpen his quills, stick him in his tail. Sharpen his quills, stick him in his tail. Another friend came by and said, Porcupine, what are you going to do today? I'm going to go get me a buffalo today. No, you're too old to get a buffalo. I know I'm old, but I'm going to get me a buffalo. Porcupine, he sharpened his quills and stick him in his tail. Everyone, sharpen his quills, stick him in his tail. Sharpen his quills, stick him in his tail. Sharpen his quills and stick him in his tail. He finished and he kissed his wife goodbye very carefully. Everyone get your hands up. He walked and he walked and he walked. Everyone, he walked and he walked and he walked. He walked and he walked and he walked. He walked and he walked and he walked. East toward Buffalo country. Found a buffalo dropping on the ground. He touched it all hard. How long you been here? Oh, a day. Which way did the buffalo go? That way. Now this is real cultural learning. You have to have lips of authority when you get older. Say, put this over here, put this way over there, and you come sit here. This is, you have to do this when you get old. Which way did the buffalo go, everyone? That way. Porcupine got happier. He walked and he walked and he walked. He walked and he walked and he walked. He walked and he walked and he walked. How do you say it? He came to another buffalo dropping on the ground. He touched it, his finger went inside of it. Which way did the buffalo go? Over the hill and across the river to eat. Porcupine eat. To the top of the hill, he looked over across the river. There was a whole herd of buffalo eating. Porcupine eat. Down to the riverbank and hollered, hey, you buffalo, come here. Old mangy skinny buffalo was eating. Who, me? No, the young fat one, come here. Old mangy skinny buffalo was so skinny he could count his ribs, was eating. Who, me? No, the young fat one, come here. Who, me? Yes, the buffalo walked through the river. Porcupine says, I want to ride to the other side. Sit on my neck and hung into my horns. Porcupine goes, no, that won't work. A fly land in your ear. You'd shake your head and I'd fall off. While sitting on my rump and hung into my tail. No, Porcupine said, that won't work. A wave would wash me off. Buffalo thought and thought. Porcupine thought and thought. Everyone get your horns out and help me say it. Buffalo thought and thought. Porcupine thought and thought. Help me say it. Porcupine thought and thought. Buffalo thought. Porcupine and thought. Buffalo. Porcupine. Buffalo. Porcupine. Buffalo. Porcupine, buffalo, porcupine, porcupine. I have an idea. Swallow me. I'll ride over in your stomach. Okay. Reach down. Porcupine crawled inside. Swallowed porcupine. Porcupine's riding in buffalo's stomach. How far are we? Halfway through the river. How far are we now? Almost to the riverbank. Find a nice grassy spot. Stop. Spit me up. You could feel buffalo stop moving. Porcupine got up, shook his quills into the buffalo's stomach. The buffalo rolled over and died. Porcupine crawled out and said, I knew I'd get me a buffalo today. Thank you. We have to have the determination of Porcupine to get what he wants. The first day I said, you whose day it is, get out your rainbow colors so that it may be beautiful. Yesterday I said, everything moves within its own beauty and within its own time and has a spirit and is as important as you and I. Today I leave you with, dream big, for wisdom comes in dreams. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Dream big. Dream big. Build vibrant communities. Safe travels. We'll see you next year. Oh, wait. Oh, stand up, stand up, stand up, stand up, stand up.
Thank you, Kevin and Rosalie.
Oh,
thank you, Kevin and Rosalie.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Thank you all.